Hey, now that you've watched the constitutional or the Constitution video there from YouTube in class, we're going to go ahead and look at some more constitutional convention notes and slideshow to go over the Constitutional Convention and those guys that met to kind of scratch the Articles of Confederation that we've talked about, and then move forward with writing and creating a new constitution for the United States. So, if you can make sure that you go ahead and open up under coursework that Constitutional Convention slideshow, and this should pop up for you. I'll give you a minute here to get that open. And you're going to want to have that notes sheet open with it because you're going to want to fill out those notes as we go. Again, that's not an assignment that's going to be due, but as you know, every once in a while we do have a quiz where it's open note, open assignment, open whatever. All right, so let's get started here. The Constitutional Convention, 1787. So this is just after Shays' Rebellion has happened. People aren't happy with the Articles of Confederation. They know its weaknesses. And so there are some delegates from each state that meet in Philadelphia here in this building. And so, first of all, we want to look at what were the weaknesses of America's first government under the Articles of Confederation. We've talked a lot about some of these. So, first of all, each state has one vote in Congress, regardless of size. So every state was represented equally, but that doesn't mean every citizen was represented equally because each state just had one vote. Congress didn't have power to tax, so they couldn't make any money, so they couldn't pay for things like a big, strong military or, buildings or paying people to work for the government, just for a few examples. There's no executive branch, so we didn't have one person that could make some important decisions for our country. And actually, our country, and when we talk about the branches of government, the executive branch, like their job is to carry out the laws, to execute the laws. Execute. That's its main job. So there was no branch of our government set up to do that. Number four, there's no national court system. It was all based on the state's court systems, which is fine. We still today have state court systems, but without a national court system, there wasn't like an overall national set of rules or way to govern over the laws of our country. 5, amendments required a unanimous vote. Unanimous meaning that everybody had to vote for something to happen. So if we were going to change anything in the Articles of Confederation, every single state had to agree to it. At the time, there were 13 states, and to have that happen was virtually impossible. So there was never going to be really a chance for the Articles of Confederation to be or to change much or to have amendments made to it. And all the states printed their own currency, which on the surface level might not seem like a big deal, but for economics and trade purposes, that's a mess. Again, imagine traveling from, I don't know if any of you like go on spring break. So you drive from Michigan down to Florida. Well, on the way, you stop through Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, Georgia, down into Florida. And maybe you stop to get gas in each of those states, or you stop to get McDonald's or whatever to eat. That means you would have to like change money in each of those states and get that state's money, which is just a mess and a hassle. And then trying to figure out, well, I've got 5 Indiana dollars. How many Tennessee dollars is that? So it becomes an economic and trade mess. We've talked about Shays' Rebellion, right? This is kind of like the last event that occurs that people finally realize the Articles of Confederation aren't what we need. They're not strong enough. And just as a brief reminder, it's many former revolutionary soldiers that fought for the United States, fought for our independence, and they're now farmers now, and they've got a lot of debt on their farms. Daniel Shays is a guy that leads a group that rebels over that to Massachusetts. A lot of those guys owe back taxes, and they've got loans out to banks, and so they get mad at the state. Remember, under the Articles, the states had all the power, and these guys happen to be in Massachusetts. The federal government is unable to help out the state of Massachusetts when these guys rebel because, again, we don't really have a national military. Our government doesn't have the funds to start an army or to have an army. They're allowed to, but they just don't have one because of the weakness of our federal or our national government. So again, that shows one of the weaknesses of the Articles. A local militia is raised to put down the rebellion, and again, that shows that the Articles they're just too weak, and that a new government is needed. Give you a minute to catch up here. So they call together, when I say they, a bunch of kind of leading political people, government officials from all of the 13 states. They call together the Philadelphia Convention. Obviously, it takes place in Philadelphia. Hey, if you've been watching the news at all, Philadelphia has been front and center because some of the ballots that have yet to be counted in Pennsylvania for the election are right from the Philadelphia area, where there are a lot of people that live there. It could help sway the election either for Mr. Trump or Mr. Biden. Okay, but the convention, they meet in 1787. There are state representatives that are there to decide and what they do, they actually go trying to rewrite the Articles of Confederation, but they finally get there and they're like, you know what, this thing's just not good. We just got to scrap it. And they decide to then create a new government rather than just fix the Articles. They realize there are too many problems with the Articles to just try to fix it. So they basically rip it apart, throw it away, and start to write or come up with ideas for a new government. And here's where they start then to write the Constitution. You might recognize that room. That video we watched the other day of the Declaration of Independence being read by all those famous actors and actresses. They did it in that room there. And that room's inside the building of Constitution Hall there in Philadelphia. So there's some key figures, and maybe you'll recognize a lot of these people's names. I hope you do. There's George Washington, as you can see on your notes sheet there. You'll have to kind of fill in the blank with each of these guys' faces. Hi, I'm George Washington. I led the convention as president, but kept quiet. He was a more behind-the-scenes type of guy. Yes, he sat up front there and was in charge, but didn't say a whole lot. Keep in mind, he was in charge of the Continental Army that helped defeat the British. So a lot of people had a lot of respect for Mr. Washington. Next, James Madison from Virginia. I am the father of the Constitution because I wrote most of it. Not that he came up with all the ideas, but he was the one that actually penned a lot of it. Then we've got Alexander Hamilton. Anybody seen the movie or the play Hamilton? I'm from New York and argued for a strong national government. So he saw the weaknesses of the Articles, that there wasn't a strong national government. He felt there should be. So he starts to argue for this new government having more power up front with our federal or our national government. Next, we've got Ben Franklin from Pennsylvania. He argues kind of the opposite of Hamilton. He argues that the states should still hold a lot of the power, which is what was happening under the Articles of Confederation. All right. Then we've got George. I'm going to move my screen up here. We've got George Mason. We must not forget a Bill of Rights. So he says right off the bat, his argument is that we should make sure that the citizens, the people, are protected from the government in our new government. So he argues that we should have this thing called the Bill of Rights. And then we get Roger Sherman of Connecticut. And he says, I think small states should not be overlooked. So he's from Connecticut, being a smaller state in terms of size and population. He wants to make sure that the small states still have some rights and some power. And big states like a Virginia or a New York don't get all the power. So, what are some plans for the Constitution? They come up, first of all, the Virginia plan. So these guys are there. They're debating every day. They're meeting every day about what are you going to put in this government? How's this government going to function? And right off the bat, some of the guys from some bigger states come up with the Virginia plan. They say that our government should be based on representation in Congress from the state's population. Obviously, being from a bigger state in terms of population, that's their argument. Hey, we've got more people. We should get more representation. And so it's favored by the large states because it would give them more power. And they thought that was fair and just. Now, on the flip side, the smaller states didn't necessarily like that. So some of them get together and they draft this thing called the New Jersey Plan. New Jersey, again, being a smaller state in terms of population, where representation in Congress, they argue, should be legal, or I mean, should be equal, excuse me. Hey, we're all in this thing together. There are 13 of us. We should all have equal representation. That's what occurred under the Articles of Confederation. Each state had that one vote in Congress. The New Jersey Plan basically had the same thing. So it actually gave small states more power than the larger states, or at least equal power. And so they start to draft the Constitution. We, the people, is how it starts. Hopefully you guys are all familiar with that. And they got to start to come up with some compromises for this thing to be signed. Obviously, we've got the big states wanting certain things. We've got the smaller states wanting certain things. And so one of the big compromises, or the great compromise, what we call it today, solves the debate between those large and small states. They figured that within this legislative branch, so our Congress, they would split it up into two different houses. The upper house would be called the Senate, and there is where they would kind of honor that New Jersey plan, where all states were given equal representation, and that each state would get two people in it. So they'd have two votes. Every state would have two votes. So at the time, there'd be 26 senators. Still today, hey, this stuff hasn't changed. We've talked about there being 100 senators because there are 2 senators per state still today. House of Representatives then would be called that's like the lower house of the Congress. So we'd have the Senate, we'd have the House of Representatives, and together, combined, they make Congress. This one is where we'd honor what the larger states wanted from that Virginia plan. That's based on population. We still have that today. That's why we look at the Electoral College. Some states are worth more points in an election than others because they have more population. And right now, each state gets about 1 representative in the House for about every 800,000 citizens that it has. So Michigan has 14 people in the House of Representatives. Do the math. You go 14 times 800,000, and that's should be about the population of the state of Michigan. Well, at the time, you got to consider, like, the states obviously want more population then, because then they get more representation in the House. And so some of the southern states had who living in them? Slaves. And they thought, hey, we've got all these slaves in our states. We're going to have high populations. Well, the northern states said, no, that's not right. you guys don't even treat them as citizens, or they're not citizens. You don't even treat them as human beings. You shouldn't be able to allowed to count them as citizens, because then those southern states would get more population. Southern states would have more power in Congress then. And so they had to come up with a compromise between the northern states and the southern states as to what we're going to do in terms of our population count with slavery. So they decided they had to compromise. They had to come to some sort of agreement where they each, I guess you can look at it one of two ways. They each either lost something or they each gained something. So they decided that they would count slaves as 3/5 of a person. So each slave was counted as 3/5 of a person, or for every 5 slaves that a state had, they could add every five, they could add 3 people to their population. I don't know, and I got to do my research on this. I don't know why they just didn't go half. That seems to make the most sense, but they went 3/5. So that's a 3/5 compromise. For every 5 slaves a state had, they could count it as 3 toward their population, or each slave counted as 3/5 of a person toward a state's population count. Okay, so this is congressional apportionment. This is where we're at today. It should say it is for the House of Representatives. So for all, like, this is basically that electoral college map. And I said each one of these is worth 800,000 people. So all these states out here with one, they have about 800,000 people in the state. So they get one person in the House of Representatives. Plus, then I said for the electoral college, you also get to add your 2 senators. So you add 2 to all of these. So Michigan, we have 14. Add those 2 senators, we were worth 16 points in the election. And every 10 years, we take a census. And that's where we figure out how many people live in each state. And then we figure out how, or what our apportionment, or our part, or our portion of Congress is going to be. Okay, so federal law, we're talking about now federal. That's our national government. They decided that this federal law, so the Constitution is our base of our federal law. That's going to be the supreme law of the land. Supreme law of the land, meaning that overrules everything. Any state laws, local laws, whatever. If there's a dispute between the two, the federal law is what we need to go by. It also, though, gave states some power. This government did. And this is where we start to see that term federalism that we've talked about. It means we have some like level of government at the federal level where there's power. There's also power at the state level, and there's also power at the local level. That's federalism. It's like a layered cake in terms of who controls power. Again, states have power to make their own laws, which they do. We're seeing that a little bit with the election. That's why some states are still counting ballots today. Other states are done already because they have different laws in terms of how their elections are run. But they can't contradict a federal law. They can't go against a federal law. So if there's a federal law on murder, a state law can't say like murder is legal. It can't go against that. This federal law system, though, also limits the power of the government to those in the Constitution. So it doesn't give the federal government like unlimited power over everything. It limits it to what's in the Constitution. Okay, we've also got this thing of checks and balances that are set up in the Constitution. It avoids a powerful central government. Checks and balances. So it's exactly what it says. Checks. Has different pieces of government and different sizes of government able to check or to keep an eye on the other parts of government to make sure that they're not getting too powerful or doing anything illegal. balances, making sure that not all of the power is in one spot, that it's balanced between a couple different areas. So, for example, we've got three branches of government set up at the federal level and at all the state levels too. So, we've got the legislative branch, which makes laws. Legislative, that's being our Congress. So, people in the Senate and the House of Representatives, that's their main job, make laws. They write the laws. The executive branch was set up then to enforce those laws, to make sure that the laws that are being passed are then being followed and enforced. And then lastly, we've got the judicial branch, which interprets the laws to make sure that they are okay, that they follow the Constitution. And so if a law seems to be illegal and is brought to court, the judicial branch gets to decide if, yes, that law is okay, or no, that law is not okay. So, solutions to the Confederation problem. We're talking about the Articles of Confederation. Okay, we had that problem that each state has one vote. That was a problem. So we come up with the Great Compromise. Remember the Great Compromise? That was where, oops, sorry, it's going too fast. Great Compromise is where the big states get more representation in the House of Representatives, but we also have the Senate where every state has two people in it. So they get two votes where everything is equal. There's a compromise there to keep both the big states happy and the small states happy. Second, Congress, remember, under the Articles of Confederation, had no power to tax, so they couldn't make any money. Well, here, oh my goodness, what's going on? Now Congress has the power to tax. It gave the legislative branch that power in the Constitution. 3, in the Articles of Confederation, there's no executive branch at all anyway, so there's no leader to make any quick, tough decisions. And for a good organization to run well, if you want to look at the government as like a business or organization, you need usually to have at least someone with some power that can make decisions when tough decisions need to be made and quick decisions need to be made. To sit around and let Congress, 435 people try to decide something takes a long time, as opposed to having one person do it. So there's an executive branch, which is led by a president set up with this new government. The fourth problem with the Articles, there's no national court system. Well, here it sets up a federal court system. As we look at the Constitution, the very beginning of it, after the We the People stuff, and before all the amendments, there are these 7 different, what they called articles. First article sets up the legislative branch and lays out all the rules for it. The second article lays out the executive branch and all the rules for that. The third article sets up that Supreme Court system and the federal court system. The fifth problem to the Confederation Articles was that amendments required that all 13 states say yes. That was never going to happen. It's so hard to get 13 people to agree on anything. Where now, with this new Constitution, it required that 2/3 of Congress or 3/4 of the states agree to pass a change or an amendment to the Constitution. So it's still tough to do. They don't want the Constitution being changed willy-nilly all the time, but it's easier to make changes. And lastly, the big problem, or another big problem with the Articles, is that the states printed all their own money. Here there's a national currency. We've got the dollar. So it makes things much easier in terms of economics and trade for our country and its citizens. All right. So if you need to go back and fill in some more notes there, feel free. This is posted. It'll be posted up on Google Classroom. But there you go. There's the Constitutional Convention. That's some of the changes that were made from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. A brief overview. Obviously, this wasn't a quick process. These guys met for a long time. They debated a lot to finally get this new document written, which we still use today. Pretty amazing. We've got the longest lasting constitution around the world. I mean, we're talking about 1787. It's starting to get written. It's still in 2020. We're still using it today. That's like I said, that's very amazing. the foresight that these guys had, and basing a lot of this stuff off of those political philosophers and what they thought that we've discussed earlier this year. So, the Constitutional Convention, Philadelphia, 1787. Get that Constitution written, and we're rolling.